TrekProfiles Podcast, episode 38, recorded July 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan, we learn their story, and we try to figure out why this show means so much to them, to us, and to all of you. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 38. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, people! As we record this, we have reached the end of Season 1 of Star Trek Picard, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the always attentive, actively analyzing, yet at no time apathetic, M5 Multitronic unit. Say hello, M5.
M5. All systems ready.
Let's do the news and announcements, M5.
Announcements posted.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you wish. Let's do the Kobayashi Maru feedback from episode 36, and that was with Alexander Perry. First question, Monster Maroons or Discovery Blues? Alex picked the Monster Maroons, and so did the Twitter tweets by a margin of 56 to 44%. Question 2, lunch with Garrick or tea with Picard? Both Alex and the listeners picked Garrick with this one, and on the Twitter poll, it came out 53 to 47% in favor of Garrick. Question 3, for a musical interlude, I asked Alex, Gilbert and Sullivan in the Turbolift or Caecilian Opera in the sickbay? Alex picked the opera, but the modern major generals of Twitter selected the Gilbert and Sullivan by 62 to 38%. Question 4. What's a better way to spend your Quatloos? A Third Dynasty Curlin Nice Ghost with the figurines intact, or the original Captain Picard Day banner? Alex picked the banner, and so did all of you on Twitter by 55 to 45%. And finally, question 5. Get that cheese to sickbay, or no blah blah blah? Alex did his best impression of his royal shatness and said no blah blah blah. But the Star Trek Twitterati had no cheddar with that response and selected Get the Cheese to Sickbay by 63 to 37%. As always, after each episode airs, I tweet out the Kobayashi Maru questions on Twitter so you can follow me there and have your say on this episode's questions. One other little note, I've been using Podchaser to keep track of my podcast appearances. It's basically like IMDb for podcasts, so if you want to keep track of me and know what shows to avoid because I've been on them, you can follow me there on Podchaser and see what I've been up to. Alright, that's going to do it for messages and communiques. Let's move on. M5, let's run the intelligence profile and start the show.
M5 acknowledges.
His favorite captain is one Jean-Luc Picard, but his favorite alien is Nog, and his favorite ship is the OG-1701 from TOS, and he's always rewatching Star Trek, but not in any particular order at the current time. He has crazy love for those Vulcans, too. You can find him on the Twitter, @Enterprise Extra. He currently hails from Los Angeles, California, in North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's the Relief Tactical Officer himself, Jim Moorhouse. Welcome, Jim, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, I love that introduction. John, great to be on Trek Profiles. Just fantastic to be here to talk Trek with you. I'm so looking forward to it.
All right. Well, Jim, I have dallied too long, and the M5 is already yelling at me that I have not asked question 1, which is, are you a Star Trek fan, Jim Moorhouse?
Yes, indeed, John, I am. I have been enamored by Star Trek for basically my whole life. I just really love to watch the show. It's about watching the show for me, and it just grounds me, and it's very comfortable for me in a way that nothing else really is. So yes, I'm unequivocally a Star Trek fan and have been for basically 50 years.
Do you have a recollection of your life before you were a Star Trek fan?
No, really not. I was a kid in the mid-'70s, 6, 7, 8 years old. My older brothers and I would watch it together, 4 o'clock in the afternoon after school on the first run of syndication. And that's really where I just got hooked on it and just fell in love with it. We would fight during the commercials and then stop. And as soon as it came back, and we'd watch. And it was, it took over at that point.
Are your brothers fans like you, or like Star Trek light fans, or just Star Trek hobbyists, or are they as into it as you?
They are hobbyists. I'm not sure if they've watched everything. I know that they haven't. My oldest brother is currently watching Deep Space Nine for the first time, so we're trading emails, and he's like, and he's loving it. So, and he's very literary, so he's enjoying it as he goes through it. I keep warning him, like, okay, there's some bad ones coming up. It's first season, but.
Oh, well, that's part of the gig, right? Every show is going to have some good episodes and ones that are not so great. I know exactly how that is. Have you kept up with Star Trek as it broadcast, or was there any of it that you missed and then had to go back later and catch up on? Because I already know that you've seen it all.
So I love this question because I know the last episode I missed live. I know exactly what it is. And it was TNG's Devil's Due. Somehow I missed that one because back in the day, you had to set your recorder or you had to watch it live in the early 90s, late 80s. And that was at a point. So I was one of those fans. Let me start with this. I was one of those fans when TNG came. I was 22 years old. I was like, you can't do Star Trek without Kirk and Spock. What is this? So I wasn't enamored with it. I watched the first episode. It's like, okay, but I'm not, you can't redo Star Trek. It's just like these idiots today. Get some perspective, young Moorhouse. And then about halfway through the first season, I'd catch an episode here or there, and maybe the start of the second season, I've caught a couple in a row, and I was like, this is actually pretty good. I'm really enjoying it. And so I got caught up on it and started watching pretty consistently by some point in the late first season, early second season. But somehow I missed Devil's Due, and I just remember getting to the next episode and realizing, I missed one, and I had to wait for the reruns, and I had to make sure. And like from that point on, I was like, I am never missing another one. So the answer to your question, very long, is that I have seen every episode as it airs live since Devil's Due, and about 2 years prior to that.
So how did you go back and catch up? What did you do? Did you just have to wait for the reruns?
I literally just waited until they had a rerun, and I would watch for it. Whether it was TV Guide, it was probably TV Guide because at that point you didn't have on-screen upcoming episodes. So I remember I would figure out kind of like where it was just to make sure if they were going to be if it was going to be the end of the season or if they're going to stop and then re-show a few, because sometimes they did that with a little break. So
I found, I don't know what your experience was on your local affiliate that you were watching it on, but for me, they were not shown in any particular order. So it was really like roll the D78 to see what number came up for what episode you were going to get.
Yeah, for me, they were pretty good. Our syndication was the Saturday, Sunday. They would show it twice each weekend. I think, once at like 6 o'clock on Saturdays and then Sundays at like 5 or something like that. So I was catching them. They were pretty consistent. I didn't have to worry about baseball or anything interrupting it the way sometimes those syndicated networks, you have a sports team that might interrupt it. So that didn't happen much. It did once I got into Deep Space Nine and I moved from San Diego to Chicago, it was I'd get some of those bumped and you'd have to watch it at 1 a.m. or make sure you were taping it if they were re-showing it later at night. Literally, you had to do that. You would have to, if you were missing one that was supposed to be on at 6 or 7 o'clock, you would just have to realize. Somehow I learned that they're going to show it tonight at 1 a.m. and you'd have to just look for it or watch for it. Sometimes I would literally sometimes set a VHS to tape 6 hours just to see if I caught it.
Or you would get the worst possible message, which would be, we now join Star Trek Deep Space Nine, currently in broadcast or currently in progress.
That was the worst.
Oh, that
was the worst, because then they weren't necessarily going to re-show it in its entirety.
Yeah, then you were just doomed. Yeah. Kids today will not know the pain of that.
No, they do not.
So let's talk about the current world of streaming, Jim. One of the questions I asked was, are you currently doing a disciplined rewatch? Are you currently working your way through any of the series? You said no, but you're always watching Star Trek. So the question is, I assume you watch a lot of Star Trek. You always tweet about it, so I assume you watch some almost every day. How are you deciding what to watch? Is it a theme-filled thing? Are you picking episodes at random? What are you doing?
I would say now it's often because of Trek ranks and what the topic's going to be. So I'm doing research and going through specific episodes that I'm considering for a topic, which is my podcast, obviously. So yeah, that would be the way I'm normally watching. But then there'll be times I love putting up Twitter polls. Like I usually put up these like 15-minute polls, which is like, okay, I have 2 hours tonight to watch Trek. Here are the 4 episodes I'm considering. Vote, or just looking for people to suggest, or just one that hits me. But I do often do rewatches too. I'm just not at this particular moment. I'm not in the middle of a season or a series right now.
One of the things that's come up on the show in the past that I often think about, as you and I have been sort of reliving our youth here with watching Star Trek in syndication as a kid, is that we were forced to watch whatever episode they'd selected for us. And so you didn't have a choice, right? You either watched it or you didn't watch anything as far as Star Trek goes.
Yeah.
Do you find that having everything always available sort of makes you want to go back to certain episodes, and there's some that you just don't feel like you ever want to watch?
No, I'm not a person that skips or eliminates any of the. I mean, there's certainly some really not top-notch episodes that I don't watch often, but I never eliminate them. There's always a time when I'll be like, oh, I'm in the mood for that really terrible, bad episode of Star Trek for whatever reason. So I'm not a skipper. I pretty much. I mean, I'm an apologist. I am the Star Trek apologist. I love it all.
So you say you love it all, but Mr. Moorhouse, I have it on good authority that you wrote the animated series is Star Trek scrawled on a cocktail napkin. So please explain yourself, sir.
I did write that. I'm very proud of it, actually. It's my magnum opus on my website, trekranks.com, my case against the animated series. I don't particularly like the animated series. At this point, okay, it's canon. Kurtzman era, Kiva Goldsman, they've made it clear that they're considering it. I never did over the years, and for a very clear, simple reason. It's not in the Star Trek encyclopedia. Mike Okuda and Denise Okuda wrote, 4 or 5 variations of the Star Trek encyclopedia and made the choice not to include it. I appreciated that choice because I don't think the animated series is very good. This will annoy some people, but there's this false narrative out there that the stories are bigger and grander and more clever because they weren't constrained by live action television. They could tell whatever story via animation. No, they're not. The stories are simple. They're for kids. They're not very clever. They're very rote. They're easily predictable. They're just not that good. And my cocktail napkin references that my hope, you could write the best Star Trek script ever in the history of Star Trek on a used cocktail napkin, and I wouldn't care. I don't want to read that. I could read it and enjoy it, but that's not Star Trek to me. And the animation on these, they're not animated. I mean, again,
yeah, it's not very good animation.
Some
at all.
people appreciate the kitschy charm of it, but it's just bad animation. They're literally freezing on frames to avoid cost, and they're panning on a frame to make it look like it's moving. Now, I'm not criticizing the art. I love the art. The rotoscoping of the Enterprise is beautiful. The planets, the scenic design, the characters aren't drawn very well, but everything else is drawn extremely well. It's just not animated in any kind of engaging way. The stories aren't put together in an engaging way. I don't like it. However, I am adding it to Trek Ranks soon. Very soon.
How wonderful. So I don't know if I ever told you this, Jim, but I had a special surprise planned for you that you walked into. I don't know if you remember this or not, but at STLV a couple years ago, we had a party for the network, right, for Tricorder Show. And one of the things we were doing was we had Star Trek playing. And I specifically had a lookout waiting for you to get there because I wanted to have animated series playing as you walked in. And I did that just for you. I don't know if you knew that was intentional or not, but I wanted to come clean with you right now.
I do remember that. I did not know that you did that maliciously. That is hilarious. That is hilarious.
It wasn't malicious. It wasn't malicious.
To each his own.
But, you mentioned the fact that modern Trek is seriously embracing animated series, which I thought was very surprising. Things like Captain April, they tried to bring Acacian in, and for production reasons, they weren't able to do that. It seems like the current administration is embracing the animated series with both hands.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Kzinti reference in Nepenthe on Star Trek Picard. I love that there's going to be Acacian in Lower Decks. I think Lower Decks looks amazing. And that's part of the reason I'm adding the animated series, is realizing that, listen, there's room for it all, and it belongs at some level. But do I believe there's a 50-foot Spock out there running around in the galaxy? No, I'm not.
There's no 50-foot Spock? All right, no, fair enough. Fair enough. Now, one of the things you told me in your preliminary materials is that Jean-Luc Picard is one of your favorite characters. And what I want to ask you about is, I want you to reflect for a moment on the Jean-Luc Picard that you had in your head maybe a year ago, and thinking about the Picard show. How has your feelings about Picard changed, if at all, after the Picard show? Better, worse, the same, different? How would you describe it after seeing the new show?
I would say no change. I mean, the methodical wisdom of why I love Jean-Luc Picard is still there. And that's the way he approaches problem solving, the way he thinks things through, the way he treats people. These are the reasons that he's the character that is I'm most connected with and appreciate as a hero in Star Trek. So I don't think there was much of a change of that. There was a change in the way people treated him and the way he was represented. I wrote this in my Trek Core reviews when I did the whole season.
Are you talking about in the show or fans?
No, in the show. In the universe, there was a change to the way characters responded to him and acted around him. So every single episode, up until I think Nepenthe, the 7th episode, there was a scene where somebody basically ripped him to his face and said, "What are you talking about?" And you probably saw that twice in TNG. Maybe it's probably more than that. But the point is, it was by design that they were showing him fail and be positioned in a different way. But I don't think he was that different. And his walking away from Starfleet I don't think that was out of character or a change of anything that you might have seen. I mean, if he had decided, if the Federation had backed Admiral Sati in the Drumhead, he could have easily said, "Well, this is not my Federation. Then I'm stepping away because this is not okay." The way, so to me, the Drumhead and the storyline there, and the way Admiral Sati was a official of the Federation. She was, working under their under their
auspices.
Auspices, and that's just really no different than the way the Admiral in Maps and Legends treated him when he came to the office and said, "Listen, here's the reasons we walked away from the Romulan rescues." And they all made perfectly good sense from her perspective. You either agree with it or you don't. And he didn't, and he stepped away. So, I don't think he was that different. I think the way people treated him and the way they positioned him was very different.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think some people got wrapped around the axle about it, but my point of view is that, if you look at the history of Picard and how many times did he take a gamble on something and it came up for him, right? I mean, the guy had an unbelievable streak of, I don't want to say luck, but I'll just say successes for many, many years, right? And you get to that point where he really did have, that understanding that, he's been able to make it work. And here's this one time he wasn't able to, and it really, really mattered.
Yep.
Yeah, I could see that being a breaking point. So for me, that was something I was totally able to accept. It didn't bother me at all.
I think some of the pushback might be on, well, he's retired and he's just puttering around his his vineyard, and he's not doing anything, and he's wasting away, and that's not Jean-Luc Picard. Well, I would beg to differ. I mean, that's what we saw in All Good Things. Mm-hmm. And by the way, everybody has the right to retire.
Absolutely.
And step away from something. So.
Right. I mean, my vision for his retirement would have been him and Vosh running around on a little, spacecraft somewhere, visiting cool archaeological sites and having a cafe on Risa, stopping at the cafe on Risa for a couple drinks and having a great time. Exactly. So when you watch Star Trek these days, how do you consume it? On a tablet, on a big screen, combination of both? Do you watch it by yourself, with your loved ones? What are you doing?
Big screen. I'm still almost all the TV, and I don't understand this. I can't watch stuff on the small screen. I can watch it secondhand, or if it's like a third time, or if I'm lying in bed or something and I've already seen it. But when I'm watching something for the first time, or I'm watching Trek, my choice is big screen streaming. And anytime there's a new episode, I'm clearly watching it by myself and taking it all in without any interruptions. But do watch the new episodes also with my wife, who's watched all the new Discovery and Picard.
I want to ask you about your imaginary children, Jim. And the M5 tells me to ask you about getting caught in a web of lies in a Burger King.
Okay.
So please tell me about this and your Star Trek collection of illicitly and underhandedly obtained Star Trek toys.
This is good research on your part. I when collecting a specific item that is you can only get through a Happy Meal or whatever they call it at Burger King, i.e. Star Trek 2009 little big-headed dolls. It's hard work, John. You can't get all 7 or 8 of them without a little bit of subterfuge. And you're referencing an article or a blog on my website about having to go into the same Burger King over and over again to try to collect all 7 or 8. This was in the fallow period of Star Trek. It was like Trek was returning. There was so much excitement, and those pieces were actually pretty nice. If everybody remembers a little Burger King, they said a line from the movie.
I'll put a picture up on the show notes page of TrekProfiles, and we'll link to your story on
and
Trek
I just
Ranks,
really wanted to collect them all, and at one point, I was ordering 2 Happy Meals and a third at one outing, to try to, and people are engaging me and I'm like, yeah, they're for my kids. I'm trying to collect the girl one and the alien one. I don't know. Oh, what are your kids' names? David and Mike. How old are they? So yeah, I didn't really have my story straight. I was stumbling over that, but
I'm surprised that you wouldn't walk in and just loud and proud be like, yes, I will take 4 child meals because I wish to collect all the toys.
It was a different time in my life. I would do that now, but 11 years ago. But my favorite part of that story is at the end, because I was trying to get the Spock one, and I could not, the older Spock one, and couldn't find him, and it was almost the end of the promotion, and I went through the drive-thru at the last minute, and I didn't want to even get out. I figured it wasn't going to happen. And I was talking through the speaker, and the guy has a very heavy accent, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you have this. And at this point, I've lost any kind of shame. I'm like, do you have the older Spock version? Do you know older Spock is Prime Spock? And the guy says, we have little boy. We have little boy. I'm like, all right, fine. And I get there, I get the bag, I don't even look. I get home, open it up, and it's the older Spock, and I look at it, and I'm like, it actually looks like a little boy. It actually really does look. And the guy had been saying, we have little boy. Anyway, it was pretty funny.
Well, I'm sure you gained a new appreciation for Burger King kids meals after all that, Jim. Glorious story. What was the first time you ever went to a convention, a sci-fi convention of any kind, whether it be dedicated Star Trek or not?
I have good stories on this, because I used to go to San Diego Comic-Con in the 1970s. I mean, when it started. So I grew up in San Diego, so my brothers and I would go to the Comic-Con every year and walk around and I didn't know half the stuff that was going on. I was just looking for Star Trek stuff and other cool toys and things. And yeah, so late 70s, early 80s, we went every year to Comic-Con. It was a big deal for us. Our parents would drive us over, drop us off. We'd stay there all day and come back. And yeah, so
that's when it was really a Comic-Con, though, right?
Yeah, it was really, really. So I probably did that all the way through most of the 80s, but at the end of the 80s, it started getting a lot bigger. And my brother, one of my brothers still lived there and was still going. And I had moved away. And when he told me, now I don't go anymore because it's just too big, I was like, dude, what are you talking about? Why don't you go anymore? It's so fun. And then I went to one in the late 90s, and it was probably after having not been to one for 15 years. And oh my God, I could not believe it. It was an absolute nightmare. There's so many people in this small space.
Yeah, I've been in that convention center. It's not that big.
No, it's very small. You can't get into rooms. Basically, you're just walking around the dealer's room, and even that is so packed. So at some level, it's a great experience to experience, but man, it was quite different. So yeah, I used to go to those. I've seen lots of guests and people, and I think the first Star Trek one I went to was in Kansas City in the early 90s when I had moved and they were coming back. The slanted fedora, if anybody remembers them.
Right.
Slanted fedora conventions. So, and I've been pretty consistently going. I go to Vegas every year for like 10 years running. So,
all right, and we're missing this year, of course.
Yeah, it's a bummer. We're missing 2020.
As we record this, we would be getting ready right now.
Yeah, it would be coming up really soon. So we're definitely going to miss it, but at the same time, it'll be back. We'll all be in the same place at some point.
That's right. The tribes will have to gather somehow, someplace, somewhere. I recall at STLV, I want to say, might be 2 or 3 years ago, you had a very understated cosplay on. It was a tan sweater with a tie. And it wasn't very obvious until you took a look at it and you realized it was from the Voyage Home. And it was Dr. Nichols. It
was Dr. Nichols. It was, hello, computer. Well, that's
exactly.
That's Scotty. But it's the first cosplay I ever did because it was so easy. I was just one day I went, oh, you know what? I have half of that. I could just make a button that says I quit smoking, find some glasses and an old Apple mouse. And I got a costume, and so I did it. That was probably like 5 years ago.
And I seem to recall at that same convention, I saw you and another friend of ours, Claire, and a couple of other people get involved in the Star Trek Spelling Bee. I have a photo of you on stage.
Well, that was a few years later. That's Spelling Bee that was won by somebody in this room, not me.
Oh, well, so. I wouldn't have mentioned that, Jim. I'm very modest. But I do remember the winning word was Bella Clavion, which I spelled from memory.
Oh my God, I can't believe you spelled that.
Well, actually, I did not win it. I tied.
Right, because it went so long. Yes, it did get a little. It got a little long in the tooth. We needed to end it.
Yeah. But I just thought it was amazing that you and Claire and all these other people who knew a heck of a lot more than me for whatever reason, and y'all got some harder words, and I was somehow able to get in there.
No, I got knocked out on Zephram Cochrane, and I couldn't believe it because there's two reasons. I have an excuse for this. I'm finally going to be able to say this publicly. Here's my excuse for how I missed that.
Oh, we're getting the tea. All right.
Yeah. So there are two official spellings of Zephram on Memory Alpha because they spelled it a couple of different ways in the script. I mean, there's one final official, but it had been spelled a couple of different ways. And then Cochrane, I had a kid that worked for me named Cochrane who spelled it differently, and I could never get it straight in my head. So anyway, that's why.
Okay. Is this one of these like with an F or a PH? Is that the...
No, it was yes, that was the Zephram. But the Cochrane was like whether it has an E or not. And I'm pretty sure it does not have an E. I may be getting that wrong again. Can never
That's
remember.
All right. It's all right. Anyway. It's no worries. It's a funny story, and I just enjoy that. I just enjoy that interaction that we had there. So that's been the extent of your cosplays, is pretty much doing that, or do you like to do uniforms or anything more elaborate?
No, so last year I did I've done, I don't really count it as cosplay if I wear an old TOS captain's uniform, which I do on occasion. And yeah, I don't really count that. But I did finally make a real cosplay costume last year where I actually got it, I cut it, I sanded it and weathered it and dyed it and painted it and colored it to be a Roga Danar from The Hunted. And I wore that last year a couple of times at STLV, and it worked out pretty good. It turned out okay.
Did you have anything planned for this year? Anything different?
I did have one thing planned, which I won't talk about because we will save that till the next time. So I have a new one in the books for the next time STLV rolls around.
So something that you haven't shown us yet. Well, that's exciting. We got something to look forward to.
But I'm also one of those people, dude, I wore Dr. Nichols like at 4 straight conventions, and I'm going to wear Roga Danar again. I mean, most people are like, oh, I'll wear it once and that's it. I'm like, I'm not putting all this work in, and I'm going at least 2-3 years with these costumes.
Yeah, well, the advantage of Dr. Nichols especially is that it's easy on your feet and it's not a lot of work, right?
So comfortable. By the way, here, my favorite story about that was Scott Mantz, who a lot of people will recognize as a movie critic in Los Angeles, huge Star Trek fan, hosts a lot of the panels, very knowledgeable Star Trek fan. We were talking once for like 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes in the foyer of the hotel outside one of the convention rooms, and at the very end we were saying goodbye and he was leaving, and he just goes, "Hey man, congratulations," and starts walking away. And I'm like, and it's because, so if I go through line and you see somebody who's not a Trek fan, they always say congratulations on you quitting smoking. I quit smoking. And he starts to walk away, and I'm like, dude, Scott, it's a costume. And he looked at it, and then his mind just went, oh my God, I didn't recognize Dr. Nichols. Thought that was pretty funny.
I thought
it's subtle.
At the last minute, I thought you were going to say, congratulations for what? He was going to say, congratulations on inventing transparent aluminum.
On quitting smoking.
So at what point did you decide that you were going to become a Star Trek podcaster?
That's a good question. I started Trek Ranks before just because I like to talk about Star Trek, and I'm one of these people, and my wife would call me out on this all the time, where I'd be like, oh, top 5 episode. That's a top 5. That's one of my favorites. Top 5 episodes. And I would say that, about 30 episodes.
Sure.
And so I think probably about 10 years ago, I said, I'm going to sit down. I'm just going to rank each season, each series. And I did that, and I put it together, and I started referencing it. And then I said, you know what? Maybe I've never done a website. Maybe I'll just try to build a website. That'll be a fun hobby to do in my free time, just to kind of go blank and create something. So I created TrekRanks.com, and I put everything there, and then I put my story about having been lucky enough to appear in Star Trek on there, and then that was fun to be able to reference to. So I would have it written. So if I said top 5, I could actually check myself.
When was this about?
This is about 2013 or 14, so
okay.
7 or 8. And then about 2 or 3 years later, I think I started Trek Ranks and the podcast in 17. I was just thinking about it, and I was like, man, I think there'd be something to it, like just a fun ranking podcast where it's not about the ranks, it's about just picking 5 things you want to talk about and celebrate of Star Trek. But at the time I was doing that, Jeff Hewlett, who's the founder of the Tricorder Transmissions, friend of ours, reached out and said, hey man, you ever think about starting your own? I'm like, dude, I actually have been the last couple of months, so let's do it. I just jumped in, and a month later I had it, and didn't know how to edit. I didn't know anything. I mean, literally didn't know anything. So I just taught myself, figured it out. And my biggest thing for doing it was I wanted to make sure it was consistent. I'm not a big fan of kind of starting and then just dropping something or doing it, 2 and 4 months and then you're gone. I just wanted to make sure it was consistent. So I said I'm gonna do one every 2 weeks, and I've been doing one every 2 weeks
and it's been a great listen. And anyone out there, if you haven't listened to Trek Ranks, you should. You can skip the episode I'm on, but listen to all the other ones. They're delightful.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I did far more research than I probably should have done, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
That's the fun of it. You get to do Star Trek homework.
Exactly. There's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
Jim, you've cultivated sort of an online presence for yourself that is almost entirely Star Trek. Every now and then you'll tweet a little bit about a restaurant or, film stuff. Every once in a while, not much, but it appears to me, just someone who follows both your accounts, that it's well over 96% all Star Trek.
Yes.
Okay, so you agree.
Is there a question? What's the question?
Well, so the question is that every person has multiple things they're interested in their life, and you have a show account, which of course it's appropriate to dedicate that show account to what your show is and things related to it. But why have you chosen to sort of keep yourself very much limited in the fences for Star Trek online and in your social media life?
Man, I probably because I didn't really understand social media. I'm an old man. I don't have Facebook, and I just didn't. So I didn't really put my name on it. Although it's not anonymous because you can find my name by clicking through the website. So yeah, I think that's probably why. I'm probably just a little bit afraid of it. I don't understand the kind of thought process of putting yourself out there. I think I've learned that and opened up a little bit more. But I think the other part of it is I'm only into a few things, and I'm like all in on those things. So I don't have a lot of peripheral interest that I look up. So I'm kind of an all or nothing type person. And the stuff I was into when I was in the 70s, which was, I loved big cats and cheetahs and cats and animals, and I love the NFL. I'm a huge NFL and a sports fan, soccer, and Star Trek and sci-fi, and those are kind of the only things I do.
And subtweeting.
And subtweeting. I'm pretty good at subtweeting.
you are the Star Trek subtweeter in chief. I dub thee.
I don't do it a lot, but there are some times when people need to be ridiculed in a subtweet.
Well, that's when I need to break out my secret decoder ring and figure out, because I never get the joke. So whenever I see a tweet from you I don't understand, I have to be like, oh man, I got to break out the code books and figure out what's going on, because I am totally not plugged in, so I don't get it.
Well, I'm not exactly plugged in, so.
All right, then we're together in that. I feel like we should jump in and start talking about episodes. What do you say? Are you game?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. So the first one that's on the list from the M5 is The Menagerie. So here we have Season 1, TOS, a glorious, glorious two-part episode. The only two-parter, of course, in all of original series. Hugo Award-winning episode, I might point out. A fantastic reuse of the footage from The Cage. So tell me about this particular episode, Jim. Is it something that's special and meaningful to you personally? Do you feel that it's the best of all Star Trek, a combination of both? What's going on here?
Yeah, I think it's you kind of framed it about the reuse of the footage. It's what opened me up to how big Star Trek was and could be when we're watching this episode for the first time in the 70s, you're wondering, how did they do that? And I knew it at the time because I'd read Making of Star Trek, the book.
Whitfield book.
Yeah, the Whitfield book. But I just can't imagine watching that episode in 1966 and the quality of all of a sudden you have this whole other thing going on inside of it. And to me, it opened up the world building of Star Trek. This is like the 10th episode of Trek. Mm-hmm. So for it to be that early to show how much bigger this show was than just a regular TV show, that's one of the reasons it really fascinated me. One of the things I love about Star Trek is the mythology of it and the continuity and the consistency of the storytelling across 778 episodes. And I think this was the beginning of that. This is what showcased that, and it's always been really important for me from that perspective. So it was kind of the launching point for me in getting so immersed in Trek.
I have to admit, whenever any of these episodes comes up that you're talking about here, not just the Menagerie, but season 1 TOS, to me, it always sets such a high bar as like the strongest first season of any Star Trek, right? I mean, it really is incredible. And I don't think we're used to thinking of TOS in that way as far as like what season the episodes are in. Whereas I think TNG and, especially Deep Space Nine, I mean, they're much more sort of serialized and you think more about what season it is. I never thought about it like that's a season 2 episode or a season 1 or season 3 from TOS, but season 1 TOS is just so amazingly strong. I want to ask you this, though, is that we've had the opportunity, and I'm sure you've seen The Cage as a standalone, separate from the Menagerie. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your feelings about The Cage as a pilot separately from what they did in the Menagerie and maybe comparing and contrasting the two.
No, I'm glad you said that because, again, we're in a different space in terms of how I didn't see The Cage. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it existed when I was watching it. It didn't exist. And they found it and they released it on, literally, I watched it on television in the mid 80s or late 80s. It was this big deal that, hey, we're finally going to show you the original The Cage. And that's, a good 10 plus years after watching the Menagerie, not even really knowing it was ever going to be an option to see it. So when that happened, that was a big moment to be able to say, oh my God, we're actually going to see this. So I think of them, but having said that, I think of them together. I do. There's just a couple of little differences in terms of the narrative at the end, but I think of them as just one big intermeshed piece. It's like literally the Menagerie is showing you bits and pieces of The Cage, which exists by itself prior to this. And, I didn't think of this when I thought about this episode, but then now you add all the Discovery stuff they did in season 2 with Pike, and it's just it's incredible that it would enhance my enjoyment of these episodes even more.
I noticed one thing that jumps out at me, and I'll be curious to see what you think about this, is that when you look at The Cage, and if you were just to look at that alone and sort of suppress or forget everything else you know about Star Trek, and then go into the rest of Star Trek, it seems that The Cage had a sense that space was much more dangerous in just the way that Pike talks about things, and like there's like wild amounts of slavery going on, and it was just very risky and dangerous. And we're in like a lot of later Trek and even modern day Trek, it seems that space has gotten very cozy. Like, oh, we know who the Klingons are, and we know sort of what they're about, and the Romulans, we know what they're about, and the Borg, we've dealt with them, and and it just seemed like Pike was living on the edge, man. And it's a feeling like I don't think we ever really got back to, in a way.
I've never considered it in that way. I just see it as the past of the Menagerie. I guess, certainly it was more on the edge with what Pike was doing and dealing with in terms of his response. But I've never actually thought about it that way. Space is pretty dangerous, John. There's been a lot of dangerous episodes in TNG. I think maybe the quantity of episodes has desensitized you to the danger.
Maybe. I don't know. I find it's just a fantastic set of episodes, though, and I'm glad you put it on the list. And it's the first time it's come up here on Trek Profiles, I do believe.
Awesome.
But I want to move on to a sort of a match set, I think. So I want to talk about these two together. At least I'll propose it that way, and you can choose to do that or separate them if you wish. Let's talk about another TOS episode and a movie. Let's talk about Voyage Home and Devil in the Dark. Now, why are these a match set, the M5 tells me? What's going on here?
Yeah, so these, I love these two episodes. They're literally, actually, now that I think about it, I didn't think about this before. It's my favorite TOS episode and my favorite Star Trek film right there, those two. And I mentioned before how much I love animals, so that's a big part of my life. And these are, I think, very formative episodes and a film for me in terms of guiding kind of the way I look at animals and appreciate, and especially the Devil in the Dark. When you realize we're the monster. That was such a huge moment watching that episode. It's probably my favorite Star Trek episode. I love the Horta. I love the production design in that episode. It's absolutely incredible. when you're 9 years old and you're watching it, the no kill eye, like, oh, is he saying don't kill me or I'm not going to kill you? I don't know what's happening. And the smarts of it with the way Spock has melded with them so they can communicate just enough to come to this understanding. And then the ending of realizing, oh, this is just a cool animal trying to live its life and raise its kids, and look at all the good it can bring by now being a miner, which but doing all the mining for him, which may not be the greatest message, but but I love it. It's just super, super cool, and it certainly affected the way that I look at animals. And the Voyage Home is this one. It's kind of two-pronged. It's the animal conservation message, of course, is super important to me. It blows my mind that they made a movie about, hey, we have to find and save 2 whales. And I absolutely firmly believe, again, having lived in that time when this movie came out, when you thought whales were going to go extinct, in the 80s, you were thinking, whales are going to go extinct. I think this movie helped that turn that around. And now that's really not something that's probably going to happen. So I love that message, but there's a couple other things. I love that there's no jingoism in this movie. There's no border mentality. It's just trying to save Earth. It's about the whales. It's about getting them back, working together. And it also, and this is kind of a weird thing, but it helped to redefine Star Trek storytelling a little bit, because prior to this moment, the Enterprise was always a character. Yep. And whether you knew it or identified it or not, it was always about the ship and a mission and an adventure and what's happening. There's no Enterprise in this episode, and it's like my favorite thing of Star Trek. That makes no sense to me, that my favorite thing of Star Trek could not really have the Enterprise as a major character. Obviously, it's introduced at the end. But the fact that they're flying around on a random Klingon ship and having these adventures, and they're just telling the story about the characters and the world, and again the world building. This is just a huge leap forward for Star Trek. I think it helped. I think, and again, it's not really spoken about, but I think this episode changed the way. Now TNG, I think, was more possible just to tell any story in Star Trek without being tied to just the guys on the ship having an adventure.
And, it's a big thing when that kind of stuff happens. I'm reminded of a story from another fandom, which was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't know if you'd ever seen any of that.
Big fan.
But, well, then maybe you've heard the story that they were always told that, it's really the dialogue that makes the show. The lines and the dialogue is really what it's all about. And the showrunner, he got tired of hearing it. So he's like, I'm going to make an episode where nobody talks, and it's going to be one of your favorite episodes. So shut up and stand by. And he made the episode Hush, which is all about no one talking. And it's a fan favorite episode, and there's no dialogue for most of it.
Yep. With Doug Jones. With Doug Jones, by the way. Yep.
Which is fantastic.
He did that routinely, where he would, and basically Ira Stephen Bear, and there's some Trek auteurs who do the same thing. As soon as they hear what people like, they say, that's gone. Ira Stephen Bear, the DS9 season 8, when he kills, spoiler alert, not going to say it, but he does that because he knows how much the fans love that character.
Well, I think we just need to say that if people have an interest in that, what Jim is referring to is the What We Left Behind documentary. And one of the things that happens in there is Ira gets sort of the crew back together, meaning the writing team, and they sort of break on the board what a season 8 Deep Space Nine might have looked like. And of course, things would have changed 17,000 times through production, because you never know. And we have all heard the stories, I'm sure, of how things got changed. But we saw what they sort of put together, and it definitely was, how shall we say, quite perverse in a lot of fan expectations, which I thought was great. A couple things I want to ask you about for Devil in the Dark, really 2 things. One is that this episode is one that I always bring up in 2 contexts. One, and you can address these in any order you want. One of the things that anybody has to sort of explain if you're trying to explain economics or what life is like in the Federation is, why are there these miners living this terrible experience on Janus 6? And why isn't everyone living on the beach in Risa? Like, you have to sort of reconcile those two things in some way, right? And it's sort of inherent in the contradictions, I think, of trying to put onto Star Trek a lot of things that I don't think are necessarily in the show, as I think some fans are wont to do. So how do you feel about that?
So I definitely agree that there's this perception. Well, I'll start it with, there's the perception of the no conflict rule from Roddenberry, RE, TNG. There's so much conflict. It's all over the place. And it's human conflict. It's Federation conflict. It's very rarely amongst the main characters, for sure, but it's prevalent. It happens all the time. I mean, Maddox is a perfect example. Here comes Starfleet. Conflict. This is season 2. So there's no Gene rule. There's no conflict. It's there.
Well, in this episode, Kirk overrules Spock's orders in public and tells him he's wrong. When Spock says, our goal is to capture the Horta. And Kirk is like, no, we're not doing that.
No, of course. No, of course. And I think that's more of a byproduct of the time than anything else in this storytelling narrative of the time. I'm not beholden to the fact that it was still made in the 1960s and there's going to be some of these standard tropes of we're killing the monster from one lead character. Well, it's like the McCoy thing. He kind of changes every episode based on what's happening. He's antagonistic or anyway. I think you're right that people have put a Pollyanna spin on what the Federation is against the facts of what you've actually seen on screen, because there's plenty of evidence opposite that. But I gotta say, and this has been a kind of a new revelation, and I won't do it nearly justice explaining it here, but Michael Chabon, Star Trek Picard's showrunner, talked about, and he did this in talking about Raffi, because people say, well, how can Raffi be living out and being living basically this
in her space trailer out in the desert,
her space trailer in the desert, and not have a qualifying prosperous life. And he basically described it as there's a safety net at some level, so everyone will have stuff provided for them at the level that they're willing to take or accept or step up to. They're not going to be on the street per se. So, and again, I'm not doing it nearly justice, but the way he described that kind of answered that question for me. Like, there's still going to be people who are not at different levels of society. And listen, there's plenty of people who probably want to be on that. Hey, I'm going to go. I don't want to do the work to get on a Starfleet ship, but I could, go mine and have fun and see a new world and travel. So I actually believe that that actually makes a lot of sense.
One of the things I love pointing out is there's multiple references in the episode to the commercial value of the per diem.
I know. Right, which of course, like the money thing, like it's been there all along. Starfleet Federation credits, the whole thing. So
one thing
we work to better ourselves,
right? And the other thing I want to give you the opportunity to react to is this. I think is an episode where I think it's really obvious of the contributions of the other Gene. Right? I mean, Gene Kuhn he's all about this episode, right? I mean, he's the one who pitched it. He's the one who brought in the fellow who's under the Horta costume and his contributions. It really is a tentpole for sort of the Gene Kuhn contributions to what Star Trek became, which I think people who are wrapped up in the whole Gene's vision concept don't really understand, that they're really talking about Gene Kuhn, who gave a lot of that, and
yeah, I think guys like Gene Kuhn and Bob Justman and DC Fontana, of course, I think they did such a good job of creating the framework of storytelling so that there was consistency and continuity and value in building those stories further and beyond what's just on screen. And listen, the Horta monster, that creature, that is a spectacular creature. It is so well done. It's so believable. Yeah. It looks so authentic. And I've heard people rip it like, oh, just a guy in a carpet. Like, what are you talking about? Look at it. Could have just been a guy in a rubber mask. And they've actually created this otherworldly creature that you just don't expect to see. It's pretty amazing.
One of the other things too, and this wasn't something I'd planned to talk about, but I also think of this episode as one where when you look at the remasters, it really shows the attention that like they were just trying to correct and enhance and have respect for the original material in the remasters, without making it look like some modern 21st century production, but it really just was beautiful to me. The remaster work that they did in this episode, it really is something that CBS should be proud of, in my opinion.
I totally agree with that. I think they put so much care into the choices they made for making the changes in the edits, and this is a good example of where the Janus 6 background and the things that they enhance, and a little maybe something flying in the background, but they did that through the whole series. Really, really, really amazing work from that crew, Akudas and Dave Rossi and those guys.
Perfect. Well, then let's move on and let's talk about some TNG. Let's talk about some 90s Trek, man. Let's do that. Yeah. So let's talk about another match set. Let's talk about Who Watches the Watchers and Destiny. So here we've got TNG, Mintaka 3. We've got Nuria, the Mintakan, who comes up to the Enterprise. And then we've got Destiny, where we have a bunch of Cardassian scientists visiting the station. And we have some very interesting sort of intercultural exchanges there while they're on a science mission to the station. So why are these a match set, and what is this all about? What's going on here, Jim?
Yeah, so these spoke to me, these episodes. I am very much anti-doctrine. I am so this is where people will get upset again. But a doctrine is a code word for religion. Okay, I'm not a fan. So I love Who Watches the Watchers because of the message it tells in just a clear as day, defining. It's got all the Star Trek trappings of Prime Directive and whether you should get involved or not, or how your choices are going to be perceived if you mess up, which they did in this episode. And how you solve that. And I just love Picard in this episode because his final resolution on this is, we're not solving it by letting them follow some fake false religion, aka all religion. So I love that. I just love this message. I love this episode. It's really clear. This is Star Trek to me, and I'm just not a fan of doctrine. So. And I'm also a fan of knowledge and the awarding of learning and science and striving to gain knowledge and whatever that means. And the scene between Nuria and Picard where he's telling her, well, when you didn't live in a hut all the time. She said, well, we learned to build a hut. Yes, you learned to build a hut. And then in time you learned to build a stronger house and a ship, or you couldn't always kill the buck from a distance, but you learned how to. Love that message. Love this episode. And there's a little bit of a dichotomy in Destiny that I'll talk about. But what are your thoughts on that, John?
Oh, Who Watches the Watchers? It's a fantastic episode. I loved everything about it, really. And I especially liked Marina Sirtis's performance as they went down to the planet. I thought she was just fantastic in her little repartee with Riker down there. And it's just it's really a standard, I think, sort of a quality TNG episode. But the one thing I'm going to hit you with, Jim, is where does it stand in Trek ranks for TNG?
It's top 10. Is
it really top 10? Are you sure?
No, it is. This is true. I don't do that anymore, John. I only say it if it's true. I think it's number 6 or 7, and that's obviously way higher than I think where most people would have it. But it's probably the episode that really clicked me back into TNG at a level of holy because this one speaks to me in terms of everything it's saying.
That's beautiful, but I feel like I want to divert for a second to explore more deeply on something you brought up, or actually I brought up, I should say, maybe, which is that have you ever gone back and changed any of the rankings on Trek Ranks, and how often do you do it?
I have, not a lot, and I haven't done it a lot, and I don't do it often. I am tempted to do it a lot of times. Have I done it to benefit myself later in an argument? Maybe once or twice across 7 or 8 years. I think that's fair.
Clutching my pearls right now.
I mean, 1 or 2 times that's pretty good. But I do, every once in a while I'll go in and see something and be like, what the hell? Why is that so high or low? But I always say this to everybody. It's not about the ranks. And of course, it's always going to be changing based on moods and the things you're doing. And also, there's a whole shit ton of great episodes of Star Trek. So, I mean, there's something, I could have something, like I don't have Measure of the Man very high. I have it, it's high. It's mid-30s. And people are just like, what can you be talking about? I'm like, well, look at the 32 episodes in front of it and tell me they're not really, really, really good episodes. They are. So it's just, it's who cares? Who cares about the ranks? I do it just so we can have conversations and celebrate. I do it because I want to hear from other people like, well, this is what I think are my favorites.
Which I think is great. Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's funny because a mutual friend of ours, Jamie McGregor, he had sent me a message asking me where my Spock rankings were for all my Voyager rewatch, because he wanted to like see which ones I'd ranked, and I explicitly said I don't do what Jim does. I don't keep a list like this, because it's literally hot takes, and I'm sure that Jim has been a lot more thoughtful in his ranks than I am when I'm looking at this. I mean, I am literally making up these things off the top of my head in a snap judgment. So I would be hesitant to put a list out there to say, here's a list of my hot takes of the best episodes.
And here I thought you were structured, John. I thought you had structure.
Well, I do, as far as how I watch the episodes and how I tweet about them and all that. But I don't keep records of that only because when I live tweet those episodes, I am really live tweeting them. And it really is like the impressions that I have as I watch the episode, and I'm not being thoughtful about it. And so one of the things I mean, not that I keep, like I said, I don't keep track of these Spock ratings, but one of the things I always think about is that like 2.5 out of 5 should be the median score. And so if 2.5 out of 5 is going to be the median score, as I look back on Voyager, I thought I ranked it a little too, I was a little soft on that. And so I'm being stricter on Enterprise. And so if my numbers are lower, it's not, I was not sticking to my calibration scheme as strictly as I should have. So I feel bad about that.
I'm tracking it.
All right, Jim, you're tracking me. So let's talk about Destiny then. Here we have Ulani and Galora, our Cardassian scientists who come to the station to do an experiment about communicating through the wormhole. We have the disgraced Vedic Yarka, played by the marvelous Eric Avari in the episode. He's so good. You just got done talking to me about how you feel about religion, but I got to point out, Jim, in Deep Space Nine, and particularly in this episode, it's all true. It all comes to pass.
Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek. I love Sisko. Kira is my third favorite all-time Star Trek character, and she's obviously very religious. So it's a very interesting so I love this episode because I think it's right smack dab in the middle of Deep Space Nine's amazing exploration into prophecies, science, faith, historical context, interpretation, all these things that are happening in Destiny. And all of it comes true. Literally every single word of it from the very beginning. What's his name? Vedic Yarka. Vedic Yarka walks in. Yarnik is the rock creature from the Savage Curtain. Anyway, that's Yarnik. Yarka, his very first thing is, I believe in you, the embassy. I know that you will do what needs to be done. And in the end, he does. But this episode for me defines kind of the folly of the religion aspect of these people following listen, it's pretty well defined. These are wormhole aliens. They're living in a non-linear existence. They're communicating the best way they can. It's pretty clear that the science is there. There's not a mystical religious element to any of this. All the science is there, but yet you have all these characters who are going to make it about the prophecy and the religion and everything happening there. So I just find this episode fascinating. I find that Sisko's response, this is really the beginning of where it's the beginning of him embracing that, damn, I think I am the emissary, which blew my mind. In the first 3 seasons of Deep Space Nine, you're thinking, he's not the emissary. He's not this god to these people. And then Ira Steven Behr's like, yeah, he's going to be a god to these people. That's what we're going to write, and he's going to accept it, and that's going to be part of this story. It's really, really interesting, challenging. And also in this episode, you have Kira, it's the first time she's basically saying, yeah, sorry, Captain, I do think of you as a religious icon.
Yeah.
So I love all that trapping. I love the storytelling there. I think it's amazing. It sets up all of Deep Space Nine. But the reality here is if you take the blinders off and you just appreciate the knowledge of what's happening, it's all fact-based. It's all science. So that's my take. And I think Destiny's really interesting from that perspective and massively underrated episode. I don't know where it ranks. It's probably like 40 or 50 on Trek ranks.
I wasn't going to ask you that, but
okay.
I think it's okay. I think it's okay to have episodes that. I mean, one of the things I've learned by doing this show, Jim, is that there's no way for any fan to tell another fan how good an episode is, because there's things in these episodes that speak to them personally. You know, like I got in trouble for saying that I couldn't relate to the character of Jadzia Dax because it reminded me of someone I knew that I was not so good friends with, and drove me insane. And so I couldn't get behind the people like, that's a great character, you know, like I get that, you know, and you're allowed to like who you like, and I'm allowed to like who I like, and that's how it goes, you know. But yeah, I didn't write this down, but I think the episode actually ends on the note that you're talking about when. Is he talking to Kira or the disgraced Vedic when he's like, so tell me about it, right? Tell me about the emissary, right? And that's like how it ends.
No, it actually ends with an amazing, it's actually a setup for the reckoning later. He says, well, Trakor's fifth prophecy or some other interesting prophecy in Bajor, he says, is about the emissary faces a great challenge, a great reckoning.
Right.
And of course, 3 years later, there's an episode called The Reckoning when he has to stand there and he's literally choosing to sacrifice his son to these wormhole aliens, gods, and of course it doesn't end up happening because of the Kai. But yeah, it's a great ending. It just shows you how strong Deep Space Nine is in their narrative, top to bottom. So, but yeah, this episode fascinates me.
Let's move on and talk about Voyager, a series that I've come to love and appreciate, being somewhat new to it, comparatively speaking, to a lot of other fans. And it's an episode we talked about before on the show, Blink of an Eye, which is one of the later episodes in Voyager. So here we have the Voyager getting stuck in orbit above this planet that is undergoing accelerated development in relation to the Voyager. So a few days on Voyager is, you know, hundreds of years in the lifetime of the planet. We get to see various people on the planet dealing with this star in the sky, and we have this amazing bit at the end with Daniel Day Kim playing Gatana Retz. So tell me about this particular episode and what is it that spoke to you here, Jim?
So this is it's an episode about gaining knowledge, and I've said this many times on Trek Rank, so apologies to anyone that's heard it before, but I'm a big believer in you can't limit someone's ability to learn. I find that to be offensive. So if someone, you know, wants to learn or wants to expand their knowledge or experiment with something that's going to, you know, we have no idea what it's going to change or enhance, you don't limit that. You don't limit knowledge, is basically, even if you think the outcome might be really bad in the present, you can't limit knowledge. You can't tell somebody they can't learn something. And I think I love this episode because that's how I see it. It's my favorite episode of Voyager, so it's right there at the top. And I think it uses the way they use Voyager as the mechanism, as the catalyst for this entire planet and society to grow, and it's the catalyst for their learning. Everything that they're doing is they're not going to be satisfied until they figure out what that thing is in the sky that they can see visually with their eyes, that they know causes these earthquakes, and
launch missiles at it.
Right, and eventually launch missiles at it, which makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I just see that I'm also a big fan of passion. I just like when people are into something, anything, it could be anything, doesn't matter what it is. It could be chess or Star Trek or you're traveling, whatever it is, as long as you're into something and passionate about it, man, that I think that's cool. And I think that this whole society got passionate about figuring out what this thing is, and it literally guided everything they were going to do to get there and figure it out. And, you know, they feared it, they worshipped it, they at some point realized it was something more. They studied, you know, they need to study and explore it. And I just think it's really, really interesting the way they uncover the mystery and they figure out what it is. They eventually surpass it and free it. So they, after all of this, they do what it takes to free it and let it go on its way, and then they can kind of move on. And it's just a crazy, crazy good episode. Just really, really strong. And that's that's the kind of thing I get out of it, is this quest for knowledge and the passion to figure out what this thing is.
I would have thought the reason you liked it is because there's a whole section right in the middle on sports ball talk between between the Doctor and Katana Retz.
I do love the Mountain or Lakeside is a straight up soccer reference. That is very much straight out of. I'm a big soccer fan, so I like that a lot.
Is that really a soccer reference?
That's the parlance used in old school football. European football, Mountain or Lakeside, United or FC, that's the kind of language that would be used much more than in American sports. It's a very international soccer type reference.
I learned something new. New. One of the things that jumped out at me as I rewatched the episode in preparation for this is I realized that there was not a single scene in all of Voyager between Naomi and Seven that I didn't absolutely love. And there was one in this episode as well, and I just want to acknowledge that every single one of those scenes in every episode was just a gem, and I was in love with all of them.
Totally agree.
But one thing about the episode that makes me rather sad in a way is that I think not that I'm one that calls for this kind of stuff. I see a lot of calls for this on Twitter, which is people like, okay, we need to know, like in the new show, what all these other characters are up to, and we need to catch up with these 17 races and these 14 other stories from 17 seasons ago in Star Trek, you know, and like Captain Picard needs to know about all these other things that have happened, and you know, what's this person up to and that person up to, and I think, whoa, man, there's only like 10 hours of show, right? So you got to be careful about what you go back and visit, but if they go back and visit these people, like there would be no one there. No, like those people are all gone.
Or it would have disappeared and started all over again.
Right? I mean, there's not going to be a civilization there that we can talk to. And I got kind of sad about that for some reason. I don't know if anybody else had that reaction or you did.
I see that. I've thought about that because it's not sustainable. I think they actually reference at some point that it's going to evaporate, whatever the actual science term is. I don't know.
Yeah, they're either pure energy beings.
Yeah,
they're either pure energy beings or you know, they somehow killed themselves or something happened, but there's nothing there for us to see. And I feel sad about that somehow. So I don't know how people feel about that. If you have a different thought out there, people, feel free to tweet me on it. All right, let's talk about some modern Trek, some 21st century Trek here. Let's talk about New Eden. So this is Star Trek Discovery Season 2. We have Pike and Burnham going down to the planet. We have Oasikan getting one of her very first featured bits in Discovery after being on the show for 2 seasons. This is an episode that you wanted to talk about, Jim. I'm curious as to what about it was special to you.
This is one of my favorites of the new era of Trek. It feels like an old school episode. It's very much kind of a standalone story. And it's really, not to repeat myself, it's a little bit of this quest for knowledge. I was so moved.
Burnham? Jacob?
No, Jacob. Sorry, Jacob just followed, man. I was so moved by Jacob's quest to just know what happened. He just wanted, and this is my whole thing about knowledge. He has every right to just know what happens. You're not affecting a society. He's human. And I was really scared in this episode that they weren't going to tell Jacob the truth, and this goes back to my doctrine stuff, that he was going to have to live the lie that he knew these other people were living. He's like, you know, they can believe what they want. I know it's not real. that's what they do to comfort themselves to get through this. But I know that's not the truth. I know the truth is something else. I believe this is what it is. And when Pike, this told me everything I need to know about Pike. It matched perfectly with the Pike I knew briefly prior to this. Mm-hmm. And it was so well written. So when Pike goes down there at the end and says, okay, here's the deal, man. Here's the truth. And he says, do you live on a starship that flies in the skies? I get emotional just thinking about it. And he's like, I do. That's what we do. And when he tells him, and again, this is like the perfect storytelling that doesn't get trapped in rote narratives. Jacob just says, okay, that's all I needed. That's all I needed to know. I don't need to make a big deal out of it. You don't need to take me anywhere. I just needed to know that I'm right. And this is the truth. And it really, really spoke to me as just a powerful message in a classic Trek type way. Love that episode.
I do too. I will say it perverted my expectations, I think, in a lot of ways when I first watched it. I mean, I had to really check myself as I was watching it. Like, for instance, right as the episode opens, it's one of the first few scenes, we have Pike and Burnham talking in the captain's cabin. And Pike says, all right, I'm going to tell you about Spock, even though I shouldn't. And it's a secret, right? And I'm not supposed to tell you about any of this, about what happened to him. And he spills the beans. And then he asks her at one point, now, do you have something to tell me? Do you know anything? And she's thinking about, the Red Angel and all this. And she's like, no, I have nothing to tell you. And he trusts her, but she does not trust him to tell him the truth. And then later on in the episode, she says it's wrong to lie to Jacob, but she had lied to Pike earlier in the episode. And I thought, oh man, this is like very deep, right? You're getting really deep into the psychology of the character here. And it really was something that just jumped out at me in the episode. I thought it was a nice character study on Burnham. Yeah,
and then of course it comes at the end. She realizes I need to come clean and tell him everything, which she does. So that's kind of a little bit standard storytelling, which set up, and then the resolution, which was great. And in between all of that, they play a little bit with the faith and science stuff as well, where Pike was basically arguing. And apparently there's cut scenes where there's a little bit stronger stuff from Pike arguing for the faith side of things, which I probably wouldn't be a fan of. But I think the way this ended up going down was really, really perfectly executed as a standalone episode of Trek.
Two other little things that I just appreciate in the episode I just want to put out there was when Joanne Owasaken, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
I think it's Owosekun.
Owosekun? All right, I apologize for that. When she's messing around with the radio, the sound design had a very TOS vibe, and I just really appreciated that and loved it. And I always love those things when they put them in the show. And there's just a glorious Saru and Tilly scene, which is really just wonderful and beautiful in the episode. And I would encourage anyone to go back and watch that and say, look, this is some serious talent we got on the show here.
Well, this also is the Tilly scene where she says, you'll be doing a donut inside asteroid field or something with a starship.
Yeah,
to Detmer. Because Detmer's like, I think I can do it, but I'll have to do a 360-degree turn. And she says, yes, you'll be doing a donut in a starship inside an asteroid field. It's great. Great episode.
So I think it's time for the Kobayashi Maru. No, it is not. We are not going to go to the Kobayashi Maru, because how can I talk to Jim Moorhouse without talking about Star Trek Enterprise Awakening? And we have to talk about this episode because, first of all, it was written by the wonderful Andre Bormanis, who was the longtime science consultant on the show, directed by Roxanne Dawson. We have Bruce Gray as a wonderful guest star. And, of course, we have the relief tactical officer right here, Jim Moorhouse himself. Now, there's a whole write-up on your website about what that was like and what was going on here. But give us the thumbnail sketch of how you ended up on the show, Jim.
Well, I'll start by saying this. One of the smartest things I ever did was, as soon as it was done, I wrote 20,000 words of literally every single thing I could remember from that experience. I just sat in a hotel room and wrote for 2 days straight every single thing I could remember so I would never forget it. And it worked because I can reference those and go, oh yeah, I totally would have forgot some of these minute details. So that 20,000 word story is on my website, broken up into 5 parts, kind of breaking it all down. But I won a charity auction, which means I paid the most money and got. And I always say this because basically you're bidding for a walk-on role, but the only thing you're really truly being guaranteed is a tour of the sets, because you could be in one scene, back of your boot, around a corner. There's no guarantee of anything you're actually going to get and what you're going to be wearing or anything like that. So the key is that I bid for this at the time that it was the lowest point, I think, of Star Trek popularity. It really, really was. It was like 2004, mid 2004, and it was the end of season 3. There were some rumors that it was going to get canceled, not even get a 4th season. And so when this auction went up, I monitored it for a couple of weeks, and it was at a really low number about 2 days before the end. And I was just like, man, I told my wife, I said, I'm going to monitor this thing and bid for this on the last day and just see if I can get it. And it went up a little bit at the very end, but the last 30 minutes of it was some of the most exciting moments of my life, because I could tell there was one other person out there bidding. And I bid to bump it up. They bid. We went back and forth like 3 times. And with like 5 minutes to go, and it was like a countdown clock on this ultimatebid.com website from 16 years ago. There was a countdown clock. And I put in one final bid with like 40 seconds to go and just said, all right, if this guy passes me up after this one, I'm out. And then the clock just ticked off and said, you have won the ultimate bid. And it was really I was running around my office. It was 5:30 on a Friday evening, and I was running around my office screaming, I don't know what's going to happen, but this is amazing.
So one point of clarification. So this wasn't one of these like second price auctions like on eBay, right? Where it's like the second bidder is the price that you pay, or you pay the price that you actually bid.
You pay the price you bid. So there was no minimum. There was no minimum. It was like whoever's going to bid the most by X time. It was sponsored by Robbie Duncan McNeil, and it was a charity, but it wasn't even like like it was. I don't even remember the charity. It was like a school charity. And by the way, it was like a Beverly Hills schools charity. It's like a fundraiser for like his kid's school or something. I was like, okay, I don't care. So. And in terms of the money, what I always say is it costs about what you'd pay for a nice, really good 2-week vacation. So I can tell you I would much rather have this experience in my life than a really first-class 2-week vacation. So it was money well spent, and I got a lot out of it. But I immediately started working it with a PA. They would call me to check my schedule, and I was trying to make sure they knew that hey, I'm semi-professional. I can do more than just kind of stand in the background. I was trying to just act as professional as I could to try to sway them. And they first had called about maybe being a background alien in an episode. And I thought, that's actually not, I hadn't really considered that. But I made up an excuse saying I can't make it that day. It's just holding out for like what's behind door number 2. And
do you know what episode that was?
It was Borderland. It was the Brent Spiner episode with the slave market, Orion slave market scene. So I would have been one of 1,000 aliens in that scene, and would have been cool. But I was hoping at some level if I could be on the ship in a Starfleet uniform on a main set was kind of my goal. So about 2 weeks later, they called and said, okay. And by the way, I got no VIP treatment. It was literally like they were treating me like an extra. So this PA calls, and she's like, okay, there's a scene. It's this Friday. It's going to be on the bridge, and they need someone at the tactical station to maybe, fire the phasers. I was just like, yeah, oh, okay, yes. I can be there for that. Yes, I can. So that worked out. But even then, going in, I knew I could show up and the director could change their mind, and they could say, no, you're going to sit over here or stand back there. You're going to be in this scene, or you're just in one scene. But when I got there, and again, I was just a regular extra. There was like one person who knew I won an auction and was kind of giving me a, hey, welcome. But it was really, really cursory. And And everybody else was like, hey, extra, you're supposed to be standing over there in the corner. I'm like, okay, sorry, I'll go stand in the corner. But they said, yeah, you're going to be in like 5 different scenes and you get to fire the phasers. And it was surreal, to say the least. What
was the time frame between being on the show and when it actually aired? Like, I'm sure it was a long time.
No, it was it was recorded September 24th. I remember that because it's my wife's birthday. So I was like, sorry, honey, we're going to be in Los Angeles. I lived in Chicago at the time. I said, we're flying to LA. That's the day. And it aired, I think, November 26th. So just about 2 months.
Oh, okay. Pretty fast turnaround. Turnaround. I've been on a few TV shows in the audience and different things. And we were on Let's Make a Deal Together and all of that. Yep. And it was a long time before
that was forever. Yeah.
It was a long time. I remembered I was on Hell's Kitchen. And I actually ate in the restaurant on the show. And my wife, much to her chagrin, was actually featured, and she nearly died when she appeared on screen. But that's neither here nor there. We went and ate in the restaurant, and I think it was maybe 6 months later. They're like, new season of Hell's Kitchen. We're like, great, let's watch it. We're like, I don't recognize any of these. There was a whole season that was in between. Yeah, it was about 18 months. Between the time we ate in the restaurants when the episode aired. So I know, and that's just typical for TV. So it was surprising to me that it was that long. Yeah. So one of the questions I have, though, is that you have all these ranks posted on your website. Do you feel that you're able to look at the episode fairly and rank it as an episode of Trek, knowing that you were on it and had some small presence in the episode? I mean, how are you able to assess it?
Honestly, I do. I ranked it. It's ranked number 6 on the website, but the 4 is the episode before it is my favorite episode of Enterprise and one of my all-time favorite episodes of Star Trek, and it would be whether I was in it or not. I mean, I love the Vulcans. I love that storyline. When I was on set and realized I was going to be in an episode with basically the origin story for T'Pau. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was emotional. That blew me away because I have loved T'Pau since I was a little kid. So that was an amazing experience. And yeah, I think I can look at it pretty fairly. And my joke that I always tell people when I'm talking about this is that, man, I could have been in Precious Cargo. And I would know. If I was in Precious Cargo, I'd be like, hey, man, I got to be in Star Trek. It was awesome. It's the worst episode in the history of Star Trek, but or right thereabouts. But I just got lucky and was in a pretty big time episode.
A couple of things about the episode itself that jumped out at me as I was rewatching it, as I do for all the episodes that come up on the show, was I think about the actors themselves, and I thought about Bruce Gray, who plays Surak in the episode. And, you get a part, you show up and you're like, all right, what's my character? Well, you're a combination George Washington / Jesus. And he just killed it in the episode. He was so good, and I just really appreciated him in the episode for that.
And you're kind of a figment of someone's you're in someone's head, so you're not real.
Yeah, all at the same time.
No, the Surak was good. I don't really know that actor from much else, but he was very good.
He was in an episode of Babylon 5. I know him from that.
Oh,
yep. And the other things that jumped out at me was just the costuming on all of the Vulcans, not just the High Council, but all the Vulcans in the show was just really spectacular. And of course, the performances were just great as well. So what a great story, Jim. And I would encourage anyone to go out and just watch not just Awakening, but you got to watch the episode before and after, because that's when Enterprise was doing like the 3-story arcs. So you got to watch all of those. Jim, it appears to me that in the Star Trek Fan Olympics, you're going for the gold medal as far as your fandom. You really do have a lot of Star Trek in your life. Why does it matter to you so much?
That's a good question. I love the easy answer is, I love the morality plays. I love what it says about our society, and it kind of mirrors it in the stories it tells and the messages it relays. But I just look at it as a modern day mythology, and I just am really impressed by the way that they were able to weave such a consistent, fantastical story across almost 800 episodes of Trek across 50 plus years. The level of continuity that maintains over these 50 years is incredible. And of course, there's plenty of places you can nitpick and pull things apart, but it's incredible what they've done to have that level of continuity. So I don't have kind of a deep reason of why it connected to me, other than I think it, the standard, what it represents for what our society could be in a hopeful future. But I'm just enamored by, and this is the same, like, why was Shakespeare important to people? I think I would put it in that category in terms of the narrative and the prose and the things that they've done across this medium of television. It's just incredible to me.
Early on in this episode, you described yourself as a Star Trek apologist. Why do you describe yourself that way, and why do you set yourself up as an apologist for the show?
Yeah, I sometimes I do that as a defense mechanism, so it's a little bit of a joke when I'm defending something that may not be of the highest quality, because I'll defend the bad episodes and the good episodes, and I'm not a big fan of talking about the things I don't like or the negative aspects or the criticism. It's not who I am. I just don't really care to get into that much at all related to Star Trek. Plenty of other topics I will get into that on, believe me. But when it comes, so I think it's just a defense mechanism that I love. I will defend it all. I love it all, and I think it stands up against any other medium created in kind of this scope, whether it's a big franchise like Star Trek or Star Wars or Marvel or something literary like Harry Potter or something even more grandiose than that might not be considered pop culture. I just think it's right there.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation, Jim, but I have to tell you that the M5 is signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru simulation.
It's time.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title from our podcast. Are you ready, Jim?
I am ready, John. Let's do it.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Jim's responses.
Working. Simulation ready.
Question 1. Queens to Queens level 3 or Queen to Kings level 1?
Queens to King level 1.
Question 2. Which is a worse vacation spot, the Void or the Badlands?
The Badlands.
Question 3. Time for a snack, Jumja Stick or Green Shake with extra green?
Green Shake with extra green.
Question 4. What's your game, Jim? Watch water polo on the NX-01 or watch spring ball on Deep Space Nine?
Watch water polo on the NX-01.
Question 5. Choose your next Starfleet assignment. USS Exeter under Captain Tracy or USS Constellation under Commodore Decker?
For sure, the Exeter under Tracy.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
That last one is really good. Really tough one. I just can't do it with Decker.
As I was writing these questions, though, I always have to do a little bit of research, and I realized they couldn't actually play water polo on the NX-01. They don't have a pool.
Well, I'm assuming you meant I'm gonna be hanging with Jonathan Archer and watching, which is why I picked it.
That's why I said you're gonna watch water polo and not play it. Yeah, because I made sure to put the question the right way.
Yep.
Jim, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Excellent.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Jim Moorhouse is awarded the title of Manager of Subspace Communications for the Federation Ministry of Sport.
So, there you go. Congratulations.
Perfection. Well done, sir.
Well done to you. Jim, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation.
You can get a hold of me at Enterprise Extra on Twitter or at TrekRanks on Twitter or at TrekRanks.com.
Perfect. Jim, thanks so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate you having me on.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your relevant commentary, your hateful screeds, or love poems in iambic pentameter for the M5, or other comments to us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be left adrift in the Badlands to rot in the emptiness of space. This week, I leave you with a quote from Dr. McCoy, who in the episode The Menagerie said, quote, "To question Spock of all people. Me, yes, I could run off half-cocked given a good reason. So could you. But not Spock. It's impossible." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to miss out STLV, though, in a couple of weeks.
Do you think it's even going to happen in December? I'm not feeling very positive about it.
I have no idea. I keep joking with Alex and those guys that I'm going to... whether they have it or not, I'm just going to go and sit in my hotel room and watch Star Trek all day. So.
It's funny because it's like you could have done that at home, right? You don't need to go anywhere to watch Star Trek, but it's like it's your way of reliving the feeling of it, right?
Yep.
But, you won't be in the Legionnaires-filled Rio, at least.
Oh, my God. That's going to be interesting, too. It's sad that we don't get to say goodbye to the Rio.
I know. It is sad. I know. It was, but it was our.
I know. I loved it. I had no complaints.
At least the rooms weren't big. They weren't like microscopic hotel rooms, which some places give you.
Exactly. That's the best thing about them.
So hey, I'm getting like a sound. So like, are you hitting the table or something?
Yes, I was playing with my phaser. I will stop doing that.
Like, why would those miners choose to live there? Is that your phone?
Yeah, at least it's a Star Trek noise. Sorry.
You know what? I'm going to leave that in, Jim.
I know. I should have. I'm going to mute it. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to leave that in.
I actually did mute it, but that was like an alarm thing that supersedes the mute. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there something urgent you need to do?
No. It was a calendar alert.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was... My wife, for whatever reason, has decided that she's going to work her way through the AFI top 100 films.
Yep.
They have that list, and she does not like most of those films. She doesn't like older movies and stuff like this. And one of them, and as we sit here, I don't remember which one it was, has a William Wyndham in it. And we're sitting down, and she put it on, and I'm looking at the credits. I'm like, oh, William Wyndham. I said, he was in Star Trek. She's like, you always say this person was in Star Trek. I was like, honey, everybody's been in Star Trek. It's been around for 1 billion years.
Oh, man. That's so great.
Boom diggity, we're done.
All right. That was awesome, man.
Was that good for you?
It was. It was good. I was just... I was thinking, I forgot to bring up, I just hit me literally as we were talking. I forgot about bringing up a point on Voyage Home, but
you want to bring it up? I can splice it in.
No. I think it was about because of the flow of it. I was thinking to myself, and I had it in my notes, but I missed it. The other thing I love about the Voyage Home is the scenes with the Federation, because I get that I have that when I travel and go to these FIFA events. Mm-hmm. For international soccer, sometimes I sit there in the room and I look around. I'm like, man, this is just like the Federation. It's like somebody from 50 or 40 or 50 or 60 different countries, and everyone's working together on one thing. It's very cool. I talked a little bit about the jingoistic stuff, so I like that. But we don't need to go into it. There's plenty in this thing, man.
I'll put that in the bonus material then.
There you go.
Very good. And I just want to say I was very glad to be on your show, and I listened to the episode last night. I thought it came out really well.
It was really good, dude. It was great. It was, I love the abstract topics. And Jamie already sent me a note and went, hey, you had John on. That was awesome. It really sounded good. I'm looking forward to getting it out there on Thursday.
Oh, is that when it's dropping? It's
dropping Thursday night. So, yeah, these abstract topics are good, man. And you killed it with your picks. I can't. So smart. I love when someone comes in with a completely different take, so you know it's going to be a wide variety.
Well, I thought so long and hard about the topic because I kept thinking like, okay, abstract H, like what, and it's what we talked about when you did Prime Directive. I was like, what's the difference between list of things in Star Trek that begin with H and abstract H, right? What's the difference? Like, okay, it can't be this, it has to be that, it can't be this, it can't be that. If it begins with H, that's okay, but it can't be like a proper noun, you know? I was like, dude, I am thinking about this way too much.
You took the abstract part. I originally I added abstract as like the last second when I did the abstract threes. So I was like, I just can't call it. I was just going to call it 3. And I said, no, I need to like amplify it a little bit because I think people just be like, what the is their title is 3. So I added the abstract part, not really thinking in my head like what that actually means. And you took it and actually made it abstract. I mean, it
can't actually be in the show.
Exactly. Homicide was really good.
So I'm super jazzed about Lower Decks, man, because I tweeted in response to Larry Nemechek. I was like, this is the first Star Trek I think my kid is actually going to want to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
He's middle school.
I think it's gonna be really good. I think it's gonna satisfy all the itches. Because I think the stories they're going to tell are going to really resonate and be strong, emotional, because this guy's not an idiot. They're going to feel like old Star Trek episodes. They're going to be smart. They're going to tap into the past. And there's going to be this whole layer of kind of the edgy comedy that this guy does so well. You didn't watch Solar Opposites, did you?
I don't even know what that is.
This guy...
McMahon?
Mike Mann just did another sci-fi series on Hulu.
Okay.
Called Solar Opposites, and it's a little more raunchy, and it's much more in the line of his Rick and Morty and some of these other, but really funny. I mean, and smart, and they all have kind of an underlying message at some level. So.
Oh, well, I'm there for it, man. I'm there for it.
Me too.
I can't wait. I mean, I really enjoyed Picard. I much more so than Discovery. It was more for my taste. But Lower Decks looks to me like the thing I'm really excited about. But I can't wait to find out about all of it. I want to see the Nickelodeon show. I want to see all of it. So I'm jazzed.
Yep, me too. All right, brother, you're the man.